You've seen it 100 times on screen. The rugged frontier hero takes a bullet to the leg or a localized crush injury from a wagon wheel. He grits his teeth, pours a splash of cheap whiskey over the wound, wraps it in a dirty bandana, and rides off into the sunset. It is a lie. It is a comforting, sterilized fiction designed to protect you from the visceral reality of 19th century trauma. In the real frontier, a soft lead bullet didn't just pierce your skin, it obliterated your biological architecture. It flattened on impact, turning your own shattered bones into secondary shrapnel that shredded your vascular system. And when the bone was destroyed, there was no riding off. There was no miraculous recovery. There was only the wooden table, there was only the rusted saw, and there was the terrifying, agonizing mathematics of a major amputation performed on a fully conscious human being. Today, we are going to perform a visceral audit of your anatomy. We are going to break down, second by second, exactly what happened to your nervous system, your cardiovascular network, and your mind when you became the subject of frontier surgery. History is never what you think. The horror does not begin on the surgeon's table. It begins at the moment of kinetic impact. Imagine it is 1860. You have taken a .50 caliber lead ball to the femur, or your leg has been crushed under a ton of shifting mining equipment. In modern terms, you need an orthopedic surgeon, a sterile operating theater, and a localized nerve block. On the frontier, you have a man who likely cuts hair or pulls teeth for a living. A wooden plank stained with the biological residue of a dozen previous victims, and a ticking clock. When a major bone is pulverized, the biological machine goes into immediate default. The jagged shards of your femur have lacerated the femoral artery. You are bleeding into the muscle cavity. Your body enters the first stages of hypovolemic shock. Your heart rate skyrockets, desperately trying to pump a diminishing supply of oxygenated blood to your brain. Your extremities turn cold. The surgeon looks at the wound. He doesn't see a patient to be healed. He sees a compromised limb that is actively killing the host. In an era before antibiotics, a shattered open fracture is a guaranteed death sentence from sepsis. The limb is no longer a part of you. It is a rotting anchor dragging you toward the grave. The only mathematical solution to save the core is to sever the periphery. The limb must go. This is where Hollywood feeds you its greatest narcotic lie: the whiskey and the leather strap. The myth tells us that a generous pour of rye whiskey will numb the pain, and a strip of leather between the teeth will keep you quiet. Let's look at the actual biology. Alcohol is a vasodilator. It expands your blood vessels. When you are about to have a major limb severed, expanding the blood vessels is the absolute last thing you want to do. The whiskey doesn't numb the pain of a saw cutting through bone marrow. It simply ensures that you will bleed out faster. It thins the blood, making the surgeon's desperate attempt to clamp your arteries infinitely more difficult. As for the leather strap, the pain of a frontier amputation was so absolute, so fundamentally incomprehensible to the human nervous system, that patients frequently bit entirely through the leather. They shattered their own molars. They fractured their own jaws from the sheer, uncontrolled kinetic spasms of their masseter muscles trying to process the agony. You are entirely awake. Your prefrontal cortex is fully online. You are about to feel your own anatomy being dismantled, and there is absolutely no chemical buffer between your brain and the blade. The procedure is a race against neurogenic shock. If the surgeon is slow, the sheer volume of pain signals flooding your central nervous system will cause your heart to stop. A good frontier surgeon is not judged by his bedside manner. He is judged by his brutal, mechanical velocity. A skilled operator could remove a leg in under 90 seconds. Those 90 seconds will be an eternity of biological horror. Second 0 to 15. The tourniquet and the scalpel. The surgeon wraps a leather strap or a piece of rope tightly around your upper thigh, twisting it with a stick. This is the tourniquet. It cuts off the arterial flow. Your leg instantly goes numb, heavy, and cold. But this numbness is an illusion. He takes a heavy, curved knife, often unwashed, coated in the microscopic dried blood of the last man who lay on this table. He doesn't make a careful, delicate incision. He takes a deep breath and drives the blade straight down through the dermis, the subcutaneous fat, and into the deep fascia. In one continuous, violently swift circular motion, he slices down to the bone. Your pain receptors, the nociceptors, fire billions of signals simultaneously up your spinal cord to your brain. It feels like a belt of liquid fire has been wrapped around your thigh. The muscles, severed from their anchor points, instantly contract and snap back up the leg, exposing the raw, bloody shaft of the femur. Second 15 to 30. The periosteum. The surgeon must now prepare the bone for the saw. To do this, he uses a scraping tool to strip away the periosteum, the dense, fibrous membrane that covers the bone. The periosteum is one of the most highly innervated tissues in the human body. It is packed with nerve endings. Scraping it away feels like someone is dragging a bed of nails directly across your exposed spinal cord. Your brain cannot contextualize this level of trauma. You are screaming, but you likely cannot hear yourself over the roaring rush of blood in your own ears. Second 30 to 60. The saw. The surgeon hands off the knife and grabs the bone saw. It is a heavy iron instrument. It has not been sterilized. It has likely been sitting in a velvet-lined wooden box, breeding bacteria. He places the jagged teeth of the saw against your exposed femur. He pushes down and pulls back. Bone is not like wood. It is a living, vascular tissue. As the rusted teeth bite into the calcium matrix, the friction generates immense heat. You don't just feel the cutting, you feel the vibration. The deep, resonant, grinding vibration travels up the stump of your femur, directly into your pelvis, and reverberates up your spine into your skull. You feel the marrow being ripped apart. You smell the sickening metallic odor of bone dust and hot blood. Your body is thrashing violently. It requires 3 or 4 heavy men pressing their entire body weight onto your chest and shoulders just to keep you pinned to the blood-slicked wood of the table. Second 60 to 90. The severance and the seal. With a final, sickening crack, the bone gives way. The severed limb is unceremoniously dropped into a wooden bucket filled with sawdust on the floor. But the nightmare is not over. The surgeon must now seal the biological plumbing. He eases the tourniquet slightly to find the severed femoral artery, which is now pulsing with bright red, oxygenated blood. Using a pair of iron forceps, he pinches the artery. If you are lucky, he has a piece of silk or horsehair thread, again completely unsterilized, which he uses to tie off the artery. If you are unlucky, or if the bleeding is too catastrophic, he resorts to the cauterizing iron. A piece of metal, heated until it glows cherry red in the fireplace, is pressed directly into the raw, open wound. The moisture in your tissues instantly vaporizes. The proteins denature and fuse. The smell of your own burning flesh fills the cramped, unventilated room. The surgeon folds the flap of skin over the stump and stitches it closed. The mechanical extraction is complete. If you did not die on the table from massive cardiac arrest, due to neurogenic shock. Congratulations. You have survived the mechanical phase of the amputation. You have survived the saw. Now, you enter the microscopic lottery, and the odds are entirely against you. In the mid-19th century, germ theory was practically non-existent on the frontier. Surgeons believed that infections were caused by miasmas, bad air. They did not wash their hands. They wore aprons encrusted with the blood and pus of previous operations, wearing them as a badge of experience. The saw that cut through your bone was teeming with Staphylococcus and Streptococcus bacteria. Your immune system, already entirely depleted by the massive caloric expenditure of surviving the trauma and the immense blood loss, is now invaded by millions of hostile foreign organisms. Within 48 hours, the stump becomes red, swollen, and agonizingly hot. A deep, throbbing pressure builds beneath the crude stitches. In a few days, a thick, foul-smelling yellow fluid begins to seep from the wound. The doctors of the era called this laudable pus. They actually believed that the generation of pus was a necessary and healthy part of the healing process. They thought the body was venting the trauma. They were catastrophically wrong. The pus was the biological residue of a losing war. It was the mass grave of millions of your white blood cells that had been slaughtered by the bacterial invasion. As the days turn into a week, the true killer of the frontier emerges from the shadows. Gangrene. Without a sterile environment, the tissues in the stump begin to undergo necrosis. They die. The blood supply to the edges of the wound fails, and the flesh turns a sickly pale green, then a bruised purple, and finally, a necrotic, dead black. The smell is unimaginable, the sweet, sickening stench of a rotting corpse, emanating from a body that is still actively breathing. The bacteria begin to feed on the dead tissue, producing gases that become trapped beneath the skin. If you press on the flesh above the stump, it crackles like dry leaves, a condition known as crepitus. The infection breaches the final biological wall and enters your bloodstream. This is sepsis. Your body realizes that the enemy is no longer localized. The enemy is everywhere. Your immune system triggers a massive systemic inflammatory response. Your core temperature spikes to 104 degrees, then plummets. You begin to shiver uncontrollably. Your organs, deprived of oxygen and poisoned by bacterial toxins, begin a sequential shutdown. First, the kidneys fail, unable to filter the massive amount of dead cellular matter in your blood. Then, the liver ceases function. As the systemic failure reaches your brain, the agony finally begins to recede, replaced by a dark chemical delirium. You hallucinate. You mumble to people who aren't there. Your breathing becomes shallow and ragged. You did not die of a gunshot wound. You did not die from the saw. You died from a microscopic biological default because the frontier did not have the technology to protect your internal architecture from the environment. You died because in the 1860s, opening the human body was the equivalent of inviting the dirt, the rust, and the rot directly into your bloodstream. We love to look back at the frontier and marvel at the toughness of the people who settled it. We read stories of men who lost legs and went back to work in the mines, or who survived horrific accidents and lived to tell the tale. But history is heavily filtered by survivorship bias. We only hear the stories of the genetic lottery winners, the 1 in 10 whose immune systems were robust enough to fight off a massive staph infection without antibiotics. We do not hear the screams of the 9 others. We do not see the thousands of unmarked graves filled with men and women who died not in a blaze of glory, but in a sweat-soaked, foul-smelling bed. their bodies slowly consuming themselves in a war against microscopic invaders. The frontier was not a place of romance. It was an environment of extreme biological hostility. It was a ledger where the cost of a single misstep, a single broken bone, was calculated in days of unimaginable agony. Morality, courage, and grit are luxuries of a functioning civilization. On the operating table of a frontier doctor, your courage meant nothing. Your morality could not stop the hemorrhaging. When the iron teeth of the saw touched the bone, you were no longer a pioneer. You were simply a failing biological machine, desperately trying to balance an impossible caloric and chemical equation. My name is Nathaniel Blackwood, and history is never what you think.